Hello and welcome to Harbor. We're so glad you're with us today.
We're the Dodados. If you're new to Harbor, we want to say an extra special welcome. If you're with us online, click the link in the caption. If you're with us in person, scan the QR code that's on the back of the chair in front of you. Either way, let us know you're here. We'd love to send you a gift just to say thanks for being part of Harbor. Now it's time to enjoy the service.
Boom, here we go. How's it going, Harbor.Church? How you guys? There we go. Come on. Man, welcome. Those of you that are tuning in online, watching us on Facebook, maybe you're watching this video on Vimeo or something a lot later from now. Maybe you're listening to the sound on the podcast, or maybe you're just checking us out for the very first time. Whatever it is, my name is Josh Adams. I'm the senior pastor here at Harbor.Church, and I am glad that you're with us. I'm so glad you're checking us out. This is your first time in a church or in a church in a long time, or checking out a message in a long time, man, you are tuning in on the right one. This is the end of a series that we've done on boats in the Bible. So we've chronologically gone through the Bible and looked at stories with boats in them, and we are finishing up this weekend the final story in this series. We're going to get into a brand new series kicking off next week, which I am pumped about. It's been one I had on the calendar back at the beginning of 2020 when I thought 2020 would look a lot different, and I called it I had a different title, and I was so excited about this message, and then COVID happened, but now we're going to get into the series starting next week. So if you've got friends that are interested in church or thinking about maybe, just finding something a little bit deeper, finding something that God might have for them. You have a friend who's not sure what to believe, and if you have a friend who maybe is discouraged or whatever, this next series that we're going to be kicking off, you need to jump in on that. You need to bring some people, invite them to it. Before we get into the message that we have for this weekend, it does revolve a little bit around some things that are scary, and I thought, since we're well into the autumn season and we got Halloween coming up and I've got, people like already putting out all the spooky decorations, I thought we'd talk a little bit about fear, take a quick vote, just see where we're at. Those of you that are watching online, I want you to vote as well. Don't just sit behind your keyboard, sipping your cup of coffee. I want you to type in there, get going, get interacting with us. And everybody that's here live, I want you to raise your hand so I can take a quick impromptu survey, okay? And I know some of you are like, I didn't come to church to work. Well, oh well. I want to see where you're at. So vote for one of these. I looked up the things that people are most afraid of. And I don't know what you're afraid of, but they categorized them, and I thought it was weird that these are the top 4, but these are the top 4, and they're not in any particular order. So here's what they are. This is what they said people are most afraid of when they surveyed them, and I don't know how accurate that is. I don't really pay attention to all that, but here's what they said. People are afraid of the dark. People are afraid of tight spaces. People are afraid of creepy crawly things, which they had a lot of those, but you can probably figure it out if you're afraid of something like that. And people are afraid of heights. People are also afraid of dying and a whole bunch of other stuff, but these are the ones that they said that was the most common. So out of those 4, the dark, tight spaces, creepy crawly things, and heights, I want you to pick one of those. And I know some of you are like, I'm not afraid of any of those. And some of you are like, I'm equally afraid of all 4 of those. That's fine. Pick the one that you would be the most afraid of if you had to pick one, okay? So let's just play along for a second. Let's see where we're at. But you can only vote for one. Only vote for one. So how many of you would say, out of those 4, the dark? It's the dark. I'm the most afraid of the dark. I don't like being in pitch black stuff. Okay, a handful. I don't know about you online, but you're like, oh, okay. I know my kids would vote for that one. That's why I have to always turn on the light. How about tight spaces? How many of you would say it's tight spaces? I'm claustrophobic. A lot more hands. That'd be my wife. She'd be on that one. All right. How many of you would say it's creepy crawly things? I am. All right. A lot more. Okay. And last but not least, how many of you would say heights? I'm afraid of heights. Ooh, that was pretty close. Let's do that last 2 again. How many of you are creepy crawlies? Online, come on, vote. And how many of you are heights? Man, it's close. I'm going to give it to the creepy crawlies. Now, that's also not as fair, because, like, it could be a spider, it could be a lizard, it could be a snake, it could be whatever. That's a lot of things to be afraid of. I don't know what you're afraid of, but whatever it is, it's under your seat. Look, go. You get a spider, and you get a spider. I'm just kidding. We are going to look at some things, and one of the things that we're going to look at is a very fear-inducing time in the Bible, once again revolving around a boat. If you have a Bible, you're going to want to turn to the book of Acts, Acts chapter 27. Now, chronologically, this is the furthest along we've gotten. So we started this series by looking at the very first boat in the Bible, which was the ark. That was Noah in the ark, and then we saw Moses in his little cradle basket that his mom used to save him, and then we saw Jonah, who gets in a boat and tries to run away from God. We saw the disciples in a boat with Jesus and without Jesus, trying to make it through a storm. And then last week, Pastor Ron preached on Jesus being in the boat, teaching them how to fish and what fish really mattered and what it looked like to go after people. And man, we just seen some really cool boat stories in the Bible. Most of the boats, seem to be pretty good. Jonah uses a boat to get away from God, but God still redirects it. Now, in all of the boats with storm stories, which we've done 2 of those messages already. Jonah was in a storm, and then Jesus and his disciples were in a storm. The boats are close to sinking, but don't sink. And the boats end up being used to rescue the people. But if we're going to continue to make analogies of what God might be showing us, some of you might be thinking after a message like last week or 2 weeks ago when I talked about Jesus getting us through the storm and the boat was almost going to sink, but it doesn't. There's a time when you go, yeah, but I feel like my boat sunk. I feel like when it comes to my spiritual walk, I feel like when it comes to me and God, I feel like when it comes to like storms in my past, that boat done sunk. Those messages weren't for me, Pastor, because man, that's past. Like that's already happened. And I think there's something to learn from shipwrecks. And so, spoiler alert, tonight's boat sinks, okay? And it's one of the few shipwreck stories that we have in the Bible, but it's definitely worth digging into. And it centers around a guy named Paul, and the Apostle Paul wrote most of the New Testament. He didn't write the book that we're reading, but he did write most of them. And he's traveling around. He's telling people about Jesus, but he's ticking off a lot of the Jewish religious leaders. So they send him. They try to kill him. They want to have him killed, but they can't. So they send him to the authorities. And the Jewish people, most of the known world was under the Roman Empire. So the Romans had control of all the judicial courts and all the hearings that need to take place. So they send Paul to the local governors and to the local magistrates, and they think he's innocent. But Paul hears from God, and God says, Paul, I want you to go to Rome, and I want you to tell the emperor, who is Nero at the time, he goes, I want you to go see Caesar, and I want you to tell him about Jesus. So I'm sending you to Rome. So when Paul stands in front of Augustus and these other guys, Festus, he goes, I want to go. He goes, I'm appealing my case to the emperor. So because he's a Roman citizen, he gets to appeal, and they say, fine, we think you're innocent. We're not going to do anything to you, but you appealed to Caesar, so we're going to kick your court case on up to the emperor. So Paul is now being sent to Rome. He's technically a prisoner because Nero's going to decide if he's guilty or innocent. And so now he's got to make this journey from what you would know as the modern day, Israel, up to Rome in Italy. And so this is where we pick up the story in chapter 27, verse number 1. When the time came for us to set sail for Italy, this is Luke, the physician, Dr. Luke, who accompanied Paul. He says, when it came time for us to set sail for Italy, Paul and several other prisoners were placed in the custody of a Roman officer named Julius, a captain of the imperial regiment. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was also with us. We left on a ship whose home port was from Adramyttium, I think that's how you say that, on the northwest coast of the province of Asia. It was scheduled to make several stops at ports along the coast of the province. And the next day when we docked at Sidon, Julius was very kind to Paul and let him go ashore to visit with his friends so they could provide for his needs. Now, Julius is one of the characters we were just introduced to. He's the captain of the guard, and it says he's part of the imperial regiment. He didn't answer like the normal military system. This guy answered directly to the emperor. This guy, Julius, although he has a different rank amongst the military. He didn't have an officer over him. He was sent out and was basically went straight back to the emperor. So he had a lot more power than the average soldier, than the average centurion. But he's given Paul as one of his prisoners. Now, he must not have viewed Paul as some of the other kinds of prisoners. He had a lot of bad guys, but they also, on occasion, had political prisoners. And he must have considered Paul in that category because he lets Paul go ashore. He's like, yeah, bro, go do your thing. Have your friends take care of you. Paul was ministered to by a lot of the believers in a lot of the ports that he would go to where he'd started churches or people knew about him. So this guy begins to look on Paul with favor. He's actually nice. Paul must have made a good impression, impressed him. He's treating him pretty well. And what you got to understand is they're going up what would be modern-day Palestine. They're going up that shore right now in the Mediterranean Sea, and they're heading towards what was called Asia back then, which mostly is they're heading towards modern-day Turkey. So they're just kind of making their way up the coast, and we've got those four characters, and everything seems to be going well so far. Then we get to verse number 4. It says, putting out to sea from there, we encountered strong headwinds. And this is where we begin to see a theme in this story, okay? We leave from this last port and we begin to hit these headwinds that make it difficult for us to keep the ship on course. So we sailed north of Cyprus between the island and the mainland. Keeping to the open sea, we passed along the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, landing at Myra in the province of Lycia. There, the commanding officer, that's Julius, found an Egyptian ship from the Alexandria that was bound for Italy, and he put us on board. Now, I want you to understand a couple things that you might not nerd out about this like I do. Luke is not a sailor. Luke is a doctor, but he takes meticulous notes. The guy is very thorough when he talks to people. This story about ancient seafaring, about how the sailors of an ancient time worked this boat and worked the Mediterranean, and the details he gives, there have been more people that have studied this chapter on ancient seafaring than all of the manuscripts combined have put together. Don't tell us as much as this one story about Paul. It's just because Luke is really into detail, okay? And so people still study this because they had no clue that this is how they would work ships back then. But Paul is letting them know, man, the winds are beating us up so bad that we're having to hug the islands. And we're instead of going this way down, they don't have motors like we have today. Everything is driven by the wind. So the wind is going exactly opposite. By the way, that's not normal. It should have been for this first leg of the journey. It should have been, they should have a tailwind. They should have had help getting where they're going. And instead, they're just meeting this really weird wind that doesn't normally hit them face on. But this entire trip is dragging. And there's a point I'm going to make. But it says, after several days of slow sailing, in verse number 7, and after great difficulty, we finally neared Cnidus. I don't know that one. All right, but the wind was against us, so we sailed across to Crete and along the sheltered coast of the island, past the Cape of Salomon. We struggled along the coast with great difficulty, and we finally arrived at Fair Havens near the town of Lycia. Now, they upgraded, we read earlier in that passage, they upgraded to a new boat. The new boat would have been big by even today's standards. It was about 120 feet long. It says it's out of Alexandria because you remember the Romans had conquered Egypt, and they used Egypt to grow all of their grain. So they had a lot of ships coming out of Alexandria going to Rome and to most of their known provinces loaded down with wheat and grain. This is what would have been a major, major ship. The centurion puts his 100 men, plus all of his prisoners, plus all the sailors on that boat. There's 276 people on this boat, we find out later. So it's a very big boat, and it should have an easier time getting where it's supposed to get to, which is, jumping around these islands and finally getting up to Italy or to Rome. But what do you see happening? Luke goes to great detail for several verses to tell us it's not smooth sailing. Now, I told you at the beginning, Paul had heard from God that he was supposed to go to Rome. He is going on this trip because God told him, go to Rome. And so he's like, okay, God, I'm going to do what you told me to do. Here I go. And then he's met with, when he's just leaning into it. I got a chance to go up to Mount Washington last week up in New Hampshire, tallest mountain in the Northeast. And when you get up there, it was super calm, super just normal day down on the ground. But you climb the 8 miles that it takes to get up there. You're going forever up this road. And then you get there. And when we got there, it was 67 mile an hour winds. Just hit us. And they're like, oh, this is an easy day. I found there's a plaque on the top of Mount Washington that said that the highest velocity wind ever recorded by man was recorded on Mount Washington in New Hampshire. On the face of the earth, the highest wind was Mount Washington back in 1920-something, 231 miles an hour. I was like, man, I'm going home. I'm like, wow, no thank you. But these guys are facing wind, probably not that level, but these guys are facing this wind that is abnormal for this time of year, and it is slowing everything down. They should have been there already, and now weeks into their voyage, they're barely making any ground. They're having to go way out of their way and hide behind an island just to get away from some of the wind, just to kind of barely make it up. And they finally get to this port of Fairhaven, and it's already now turning into wintertime, and we'll come back to that here in a second. But I wanted to stop, and I wanted to ask you if you've ever felt like what I think Paul might have felt like. God, I'm doing something you asked me to do. Why are you making it so hard for me to do it? And I'm sitting there going, if I'm Paul, I'm going, I was innocent and I could have been let go, but you told me I needed to go to Rome, and now you're just hitting me in the face with wind after wind. Like, God, I'm stuck on this stinking transport ship. I'm sure it wasn't comfortable. 120 feet was a big ship, but not when you divide it by 276 people, Like, I'm like, God, I could use a little more space than this. If you could let me off this boat, that would have been nice, but we're still not there. And he seems to, Paul definitely has a better attitude than I would have, but if God called him, why wouldn't he help him? And I have that debate in my own spiritual life sometimes. God, you called me to be a better husband, a better father, a better boss, a better employee, a better friend. You've called me to do these things, and I'm trying to be better, but man, it's so hard. Can't you give me a tailwind today? Can't you just put a little wind in my sails in the right direction? I feel like everything is pulling me back from the thing I'm supposed to be doing. And we begin to doubt God, don't we? When I say these kind of rhetorical questions that I'm clearly showing my own fault in, and then nobody responds. Online, don't leave me hanging. Be like, yes, Pastor, I'm with you. I also doubt God from time to time. It hurts our walk because we begin to believe that either we didn't hear from God or that God doesn't love us. And if you're sitting there going, well, this is just like the last story with the disciples. It is, except for one big difference. When Jesus told him, let's go to the other side, Jesus got in the boat with them. And I know some of you are not as spiritual as you want to pretend, because when I was preaching that, and I'm like, here comes the storm, you got to have faith, you were sitting there going, yeah, it's easy to have faith when Jesus is in the boat. And you're right. Like, it would have been, I would think it'd be a little bit easier. Like, well, this guy can walk on water, so I'm going to hang close to him. Like, I get it. But the disciples had Jesus. Paul doesn't have Jesus. We get to be in the same boat as Paul. Paul didn't hang out with Jesus. Paul gets to hear about Jesus secondhand. You and I didn't physically get to walk and talk with Jesus, but we're told to go forward in faith, just like Paul was. So he has the same situation we have where, yeah, I mean, like, nobody here is cynical. I know you're not, but I would have been back in the day. And I'd be like, yeah, preach about Jesus being in the boat, but come work where I work. Come hang out at my house. Be in this marriage, be in this friendship, be in this family, and then tell me about how easy it is. It's a lot easier if Jesus was there beside you. And I think Paul might have had that same temptation. At least the disciples, when they were going through these storms, they could look over and see that Jesus was there. But when you're told to do something by God and then you feel abandoned by him, that's when your faith is really tested. And that's when we really struggle. It says this in 2 Corinthians, and this is a good verse for those of you that might be feeling a little discouraged. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse number 8 says this: we are pressed on every side by troubles. Man, the wind isn't just blowing in our face, it's hitting us from every direction, but we're not crushed. We may be pressed, but we're not crushed. Yes, to be crushed. We're not crushed. Wake up, let's go. We might be pressed, but we're not crushed. We're perplexed, that means we're confused, we don't know what's going on, but not driven to despair. We might be messed up, we might be struggling, but we're not going to give up, we're not going to panic. We're hunted down, the next verse goes on to say. We're hunted down, but never abandoned. This might feel like, listen, if you're Paul, if you're on a slave ship, if you're on a what used to be a grain transport ship that's now been recommissioned by the military to be a slave ship, you're now in chains. Maybe there's a good chance he got chained up when he's on the boat. We'll get to that later. But you're there as a prisoner. You're going, I feel like I might be abandoned. I feel like, hey, I hear messages about Jesus in the boat, but if you're asking me, I feel abandoned by God. And this verse says, hey, listen, you might be hunted down, but you're not abandoned. You might get knocked down, but you're not destroyed. Man, there's sometimes I need that verse. There's somebody listening right now needs that verse. You might get knocked down. You might be getting hit in the face with wave after wave, wind after wind, slower progress. You might be getting the delay that you know that means you're done. But you need to understand that delays don't mean defeat. You may not be where you want to be. You may not see the progress that you want in your spiritual journey. You may not see the victory over your addiction that you wanted. You may not have the resolution for your marriage that you've been praying for. You may not see your child come back to God like you've been begging. You may not find your growth spiritually to be what you had hoped for. There's all these things where you go, it's not what I think. I wanted more. I have a different expectation. I want this. I have this. Why isn't God doing that? And you feel like it's so slow. It's not happening. This must mean that God doesn't love me, or God isn't for me, or he doesn't want good for me. That's not true. You might be delayed on where you want to be, on the progress that you're hoping for, but you have to understand that voice that says, oh, this delay, it's because you're never going to make it. Oh, you had a setback, you gave back into that temptation, you're never going to get victory. You found you got another fight. That's because this relationship is too far gone. You hear those lies because Satan loves for us to think that if everything is delayed, then that must mean it's done. And God says, no, just because it's delayed, because it's not the timeline that you want, doesn't mean I've fallen off my throne. It means I've got something for you. It might take a little bit of patience, but I'm not done with you, and you haven't been defeated yet. Let's move on. So they get to Fairhaven, and now winter has set in. We know it's winter because at one point he says, hey, the great fast has happened. And the great fast is called the Day of Atonement back in this time, which is also today called Yom Kippur, which takes place usually at the end of September or the very beginning of October. So this next part that we're reading takes place right about now, in the middle of October. And it says, we had lost a lot of time, verse number 9. The weather was becoming dangerous for sea travel because it was so late in the fall, and Paul spoke to the ship's officers about it. So Paul goes up and he says, hey guys, excuse me, men, I believe there's trouble ahead if we go on. If we go down this road, now listen, when the man of God steps up and he says, hey, I got a word for you. I want to give you a little bit of help. Just pay attention. Just lean in for a second. I'm going to try to spare you some heartache. He goes, listen, if we go down this road, if you keep going where you think you want to go, if we go this way, shipwreck is coming. Loss of cargo is coming. And a danger to our life is coming. He warns them. Paul doesn't have to. I'm going to be honest with you. I want you to have respect for your pastor. I want you to like me. But if I'm being honest and I'm Paul, I'm like, okay, do what you're going to do. We're going to sink. I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. God told me I'm going to Rome. I don't know about you all. Hope you can float. I'm not as nice as Paul is. Paul's like, hey, guys, this is a bad idea. We don't want to go down this way. He says, hey, this is all the stuff that can happen. It says, but the officer in charge, that's Julius again. Now, at least he listened to Paul. At least he had enough respect to let Paul say it. But it says that he, instead, the officer in charge of the prisoners, he listened more to the ship's captain and the owner than to Paul. Now, these guys, and listen, if I'm Julius, I'm like, I like Paul. The guy's a philosopher. He's a pastor. He don't know nothing about sailing. Captain, owners, like you guys who've done this, what do you think? Now, what they think, it says that they want to go on, and since Fairhaven was an exposed harbor, a poor place to spend the winter, most of the crew wanted to go on to Phoenix. I want to go to Phoenix. It's the first time ever somebody wants to go to Phoenix. Farther up the coast of Crete, and they wanted to spend the winter there. Phoenix was a good harbor with only a southwest and northwest exposure. When the winter comes, it's too hard to sail, and they're like, hey, we don't want to stay in this harbor. And they they want to go on. Do you guys understand how harbors worked back in the day? It's a little, still the same today, but the necessity was much higher. This is actually the passage that inspired me to name our church Harbor.Church. Side note, we'll get back to preaching in a second. I didn't know what to call this church. God's like, start a church. I'm like, man, I want something that like has to do with like Cape Cod and like something that like, God, like, why do we need a church? Like, I don't want another church. There's too many churches as it is. If we're going to do something, we need to be different. And God was like, what do you want out of a church? What should a church be? Why do you think my plan for rescuing people is going to be using the local church? I was like, what should a local church be? And I began to read the scriptures about how God designed church. And then I kept coming back to the parallel of a harbor. Now, I liked Anchor. I thought about maybe we could be Anchor Church or Refuge Church. I didn't want to be Lighthouse Church. There's too many of those. But I was like, man, I want to be something. And I went, okay, a harbor. A harbor is a place where you can go to get out of a storm and you can be sheltered. And I thought, man, that's what a church needs to be. A good church needs to be a place where people can get out of the storm. They can, if they're going through it, they can go, hey, I'll be welcome there. And I hope it's always our goal that whoever walks in the door feels welcome. That means by you and by me, they feel like, hey, I can go there. And I can get shelter during this storm I'm going through. But a harbor is more than just a shelter. A harbor is also a place where you get resupplied. If you got a broken sail, if you lost an oar, you need some repairs, there you go to the harbor. You can get built back up. You need to be built up. Join a connect group. Get into something that's going to build you in your faith. Don't just rely on the weekend services. Nobody wrote that down, but I hope it's sinking in, okay? A harbor isn't just that either, but isn't just a shelter and a place to get resupplied. It's also a place to get launched out of. It's a place where if you're going to go on a voyage, you leave out of the harbor. It's the launching pad. I hope our church launches more churches. I hope our church, every time you come in and listen or gather, you are launched back out into your community, launched into your families, launched into your workplaces, going, God, how do I take what you've given me and go share it with a lost world? That's what I wanted Harbor to be. That's why I love this passage. And this passage speaks to their desire. I want to get in a harbor. I want to get someplace close. But their motivation for going to Phoenix wasn't exactly how they want to portray it. Sure, the wind matters. Here's the truth. Fair Havens is a small port, and they're sailors. And they're going to be there for 3 months. They want a big port. They want to have fun. Like, this place is boring. You know what? If we just hurry up, we can get up to Phoenix. It's a much bigger place. If we got to spend 3 months somewhere, let's get up there. And that's what they wanted. They just saw something better. And listen, you need to understand that better isn't always better. Okay? How well do you listen? The man of God told, hey, we don't want to go out. We don't want to leave. God gave us this harbor. We need to stay in this harbor. We need to stay where we're at. It's really hard for me not preach a whole nother message on that. But like, he goes, listen, we need to stay here. And they're like, no, we want to go out that way. They're looking for an improvement. And a lot of times I've noticed in my own life, when I'm looking for improvement, it ends up really just being a distraction, not really an improvement. And it says this in Proverbs chapter 12, verse number 15. It says, fools think their own way is right, but the wise, well, they listen to others. Now, I'm asking you, we look at these sailors and we're like, oh, guys, you should have listened to Paul. How well do you listen? How well do you listen? There was a study done, I found it on Psychology Today. There was a study done, they found a lot of reasons that people don't listen. The number one reason is because they don't want to look bad. So people don't listen because they're trying to impress other people. If I don't listen to you, I look like I have it all together. I don't need your opinion. I've got it figured out. And we don't listen because we want to look like we already have the answers. And that's an arrogance. That's an ego. That's your pride. And if it happens between you and people around you, then I know it happens between you and God. Because sometimes God's like, hey, don't do that. Hey, I want you to go down this path. I got it, God. I think I know what's best. And God's like, oh. Now, some of you probably should elbow the person you're sitting next to because you're like, you don't ever listen. And don't actually do that. They already know, and they won't listen to your elbow either. They also found in the same study that they did a study where they showed a group of people a really nice video where somebody gets like surprise gifts. And man, it just made them feel good, and it filled them with gratitude. And then they showed another group of people a video where somebody's getting bullied and it made them angry. And then they gave them instructions, and the group that was angry was 3 times less likely to receive instructions. And they tested it on a bunch of different areas. This is the University of Pennsylvania did this study. And people that are filled with gratitude are much more willing to hear instruction and do it. They just found 3 times more likely. In every scenario they did it, that was the average. And I went, man, am I that angry? Because there's a lot of times where I ain't listening to anybody. I'm like, man, anger does that. You just get ticked. If you don't think that's true, just go look at the world around you. People are mad and you can't tell them anything. You're like, the sky is blue. No, it's not. And you're like, okay, whatever, help yourself. But we don't listen very well. We don't want other people to tell us anything. It says this in Proverbs 24, verse number 6. For by wise guidance you can wage your war, and in abundance of counselors there is victory. There's something to be said for surrounding yourself with people who will give you some wise counsel. I'm not talking about your buddies whose lives are more screwed up than yours, and then they give you the thumbs up to make a dumb choice. That is not a multitude of counselors. That is a group of idiots. What you need to do is you need to find some people who love you and have something in their life bigger than their own opinion that can help you. And that's why it doesn't mean that they're better than you. It just means you get around people that actually care about you and you say, hey man, help me stay where I need to go. Get some godly people around you that share your faith and can help you grow in that. That's so important. You're trying to do it on your own. You're very susceptible getting knocked around by anything that's out there. Back to that motive, though, for those sailors. They wanted something better, and so they were willing to let go of what they had to try to upgrade. And this desire we have to upgrade drives us a lot to be discontent. I know this is huge for me, and I'm sharing that with you because I struggle. My wife and I had a long conversation about it this week. She's like, Josh, man, you're amazing and good looking. She did say that, but it's my story. I'm gonna ad lib as I want. But she said, hey, she's like, you struggle, Josh, with you think that you've become complacent, and what it really is doing is it's making you discontent. And I always find myself looking for ways to make things better. But what I have come to understand, even in my heart, that my flesh will take and twist that, and there'll be something good that God's given me, and I just look and go, well, it could be better. Now I become discontent. And now I begin to poke holes in things. And now I begin to find myself not liking what God has given me because the grass is greener on the other side. And this discontentment, Satan loves to fuel this. He does it in our marriages. He does it in our workplaces. Doesn't matter if the job you have today is so much better than the job you have 10 years ago. All you do is you look at your paycheck and you go, I wish it was more. And God's going, I gave you that job. How about not always being so dissatisfied? We look at the person that we said vows to and we go, man, I could do better than that. God goes, no, that's not how it works. We look at some of the things and we see how other people are doing or what other people have, and we begin to just become envious, discontent. It says this in, I forget where that verse was. We'll get to that in here in a second. I do want to leave you with this note here. Contentment comes from convictions, not circumstances. I wrote this because I always felt like if I was discontent, it came from me looking at my circumstances. It came from me looking at something, and it wasn't based on a conviction. When God speaks and I respond with a conviction, I find myself more content, more willing to go, okay, hey, this is where I'm at. This is where God has given me. This is the job he's given me. This is the house he's given me. This is where we're going forward. This is what I'm dealt. This is what I'm going to do. But it comes from my conviction. When I begin to look at my circumstances, well, I don't like this, and their circumstance is better, I find myself discontent, and I have to be reminded, and this story is a great point to that. These sailors endanger them. We'll jump on, and we'll come back to some of the verses here in a minute. It says, when the light wind began blowing, because they won't listen to Paul in verse number 13, when a light wind began blowing from the south, the sailors thought they could make it. So they pulled up anchor, and they sailed close to the shore of Crete. But the weather changed abruptly, and a wind of typhoon strength called a northeaster. Come on, Luke, get your act together. Nor'easter. It says, it burst across the island and blew us out to sea. So you got to understand, they thought they could make it, But they get out, and the wind is so strong, they can't even get back to shore. And they were hugging the shore. The wind is so strong that it pushes them out, and there was nothing they could do to get back to land. So they just finally, rather than fight it and have their mast break or their sails tear, they're like, okay, we're just going to ride it for a little bit. So it blows them out to sea, and it says the sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind, so they gave up and let it run before the gale. This was a tactic that apparently happened quite a bit. Remember, if you don't have motors, you're at the mercy of the wind. They're like, fine, let's just see what happens. We sailed along the sheltered side of a small island named Cauda, where with great difficulty we hoisted aboard the lifeboat being towed behind us. Back then, they didn't secure the lifeboats to the side. They would just let them be pulled behind until the storm came. This is how bad the storm is, that even with the rope, just a bunch of guys, they could barely pull their lifeboat back up to the ship. So pretty heavy rains, pretty heavy wind. Then the sailors bound ropes across the hull. They didn't even know this existed till Luke told them about it. These guys run ropes and cables around their boat, out the outside, under the water, up, and came back in, and that's what they used to tie it together, because the weight inside of the boat, as the boat rocked, that much weight would make the boat break apart. So they tie the boat together, and like, once again, people didn't even know that they could do this. This is Luke recording it. They bound it together and hoped to strengthen it. They were afraid of being driven across the sandbars of Syrtis off the African coast. There was a place known off of the northern shore of Africa that had these sandbars miles and miles away from the actual shore, and a lot of boats would hit them, but it was too far for anybody to swim in, so a lot of boats would hit these sandbars, and the guys would just drown because there's no way they could actually swim to shore. These sailors are so afraid they're going to be driven all the way down to the African coast that they begin to freak out. So it says they lowered the sea anchor to slow the ship, and they were driven before the wind. So once again, just getting tossed about. It says the next day, as the gale force winds continued, so 2 days in a row now, as the gale force winds continued to batter the ship, the crew began throwing the cargo overboard. The following day, 3 days in, they even took some of the ship's gear. This is their tackle, some of the stuff they needed to sail the ship. They began throwing the tackle over. And they threw that overboard. The terrible storm raged for many, many days, blotting out the sun and the stars until at last all hope was gone. These guys are experienced sailors, and not just a couple of them, probably near 100 of them. I mean, there's a lot of men that know how to sail a boat, and it says all hope was gone. They've already thrown over a lot of their cargo, a lot of their extra stuff. They've thrown over a lot of their the nice tools they had. They've just basically got a boat and some wheat in the hull, and then all the prisoners left. That's all they got. And it says that the sun was blotted out and the stars were blotted. The storm is so bad that during the day, it's just clouds, gray, black, overcast. And at night, so many clouds they can't find the stars. This is a big deal. They don't have navigation systems. They didn't have GPS. The only way they knew how to find themselves was from the sun or the stars. And guess what? That was taken away from them. And we began to see people who have lost their direction. They've lost their ability to navigate. And I see in the world today, so this is speaking on a large level, I see it in myself, and I think if you're honest, you see it in yourself on an individual level, and we see it in this story, that despair grows when direction is gone. When we lose direction, when we don't know which way is up, when we don't know how to go. Now, usually it takes a storm of the magnitude that we lose the things we were depending on. Our GPS is gone. We no longer have something to rely on besides God, what we were relying on. And these men, they were smart. They could navigate the stars. They could figure out this constellation is there. We got to go this way. The sun is this way. We got to go, okay, we're going this way. They knew where everything was until they didn't know where everything was. And it takes us being turned around, caught in something that disorients us, a situation that takes us out of our normal, an environment that scares us. I can't tell if I'm talking about this Bible story or 2020. It takes us being stuck in something that we've never been stuck in before. It takes everybody around us freaking out. It takes us going, I had a plan and now that plan won't happen. And then all of a sudden when we lose our plan and our direction and our hopes and everybody around us loses what they were doing, When all of that direction is gone, man, the despair grows. The end of that verse said, all hope was gone. Not hope was diminished. It was gone. A whole bunch of men, over 200 men, and they've all given up. We're in trouble, guys. You look around the country, you might just have to look around your living room. When we don't know what to do next, man, our fear creeps in. Our despair grows. It's in those environments when we're freaking out, when we don't know how we're going to make the next rent check. We don't know how we're going to help our kid get through this rough time. We don't know how we're going to handle that diagnosis that the doctor just gave us. We don't know how we're going to make it. It's in those times that our despair really grows. And I'm not trying to hammer that for any other reason than I think sometimes God lets us get there because that's the only time that we'll look to him. It's the only time we're open to something besides ourselves when we've lost all of our direction. He doesn't want that, but they stubbornly went after what they wanted. And what it got them was despair. And I think if you want to learn anything, maybe score this away in the back of your mind. Keep going down the path you're going. You're going to end up with no direction, freaking out, going, man, I don't know what to do. And some of you have already found yourself there. You might be watching or listening to this going, that's exactly where I'm at right now. Or, hey, I know what you're talking about, Pastor. 20 years ago, I found myself on a road of despair. I didn't know what to do. If you can remember that, just know, this is why I love to tell you guys Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It's a great set of verses for your life, that if you'll trust in the Lord with all your heart and you don't lean on your ability to understand things, you don't depend on yourself, but if instead you seek God's will, if you don't lean on you and you seek him, he'll direct your path. He'll guide your steps. This is where we have to learn to put our flesh under discipline. Let's move on with the story. It says nobody had eaten for a long time. Remember, it's been days and days and days. And finally, Paul called the crew together and he said, men, you should have listened to me in the first place and not left Crete. You would have avoided all the damage and loss. I'll be honest with you. I read this verse and I went, Paul, not a good time for an I told you so. Guys, I don't want to say anything, but I told you so. Welcome to the storm, guys. I'm going to sit back and watch what God does. That's not what he's doing. And for all of you who like to be the I told you so person, that's not what Paul is doing. That's what you and I would do. What he is doing is he's saying, guys, I was right before and I'm right now. Please listen now is what he's trying to do. He wasn't coming with an I told you so. He's coming with a solution. So let me just help you. Those of you that are the I told you so person, Paul's real goal is to get them to listen to God's plan that's coming next. That's the only reason he's reminding them that he was right first. Most of us are like, I just want to remind you that I'm right. I don't know how to fix your problem. I don't know how to help you. I just want you to remember that I was right. And that's where we want to leave it. That's the wrong attitude. Paul's like, listen to me, guys. Hear me out. I was right before and I'm right again. All right? Take courage. I love this. Take courage. None of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. That sounds like conflicting news there, Paul. He goes, but listen to me. Last night, an angel of God to whom I belong, here's his testimony. I have something you guys don't have. I have a relationship with the creator of the universe. If you think that this story is just about Paul and doesn't apply to you today, you're not listening hard enough. He says, listen up, people around me, family members, friends, co-workers, people in despair, people freaking out, people who have no hope. Listen up, I've got a hope, not because I'm awesome, but because I have a God that I'm close to, a Lord that I serve, a Savior that I've invited into my heart, somebody that's bigger than me that I serve, has got a message of hope. As much as it was for Paul back then, it's for you and I today. He says, listen, the angel of the Lord, the God whom I belong, the God whom I serve, he stood beside me and he said, don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. And what's more, the Bible says that God can do exceedingly abundantly above and beyond. He can do so much more than what you ask or think. God says, what's more, God in his goodness has granted safety for everyone sailing with you. So take courage, for I believe God. This is Paul's testimony again. It will be just as God said, but we will be shipwrecked on an island. We're going to be shipwrecked, but we're all going to make it. I know that doesn't sound super encouraging, but Paul looks at a ship full of 275 other men. And he says, God told me he's going to save your lives. I want you to see how it says it, though, in the verse. It says in verse number 24, God in his goodness has granted safety. Why would it say that? He has granted it because he was requested it. Do you know what that means? That Paul, during that storm, prayed for every single one of his shipmates. God granted Paul's request. If you go read in the Greek, it says that Paul stood before having his request granted. Paul, during his time in that storm, was praying for 275 other people. And God said, Paul, I already told you you're going to make it. And Paul said, God, would you save these guys' lives? You know that means Paul wasn't just praying for Luke and artist, Texas guy, whatever his name was, weird name guy. He wasn't praying for just his friend Julius. He's praying for all those sailors that told him he was stupid. He's praying for all the other prisoners who were probably pretty bad criminals. He's praying for all the other soldiers that would kill him just as well as look at him. Paul prayed for his enemies and his friends alike. I do not see that happening in the world today. I do not see the men and women that say that Jesus Christ is their Savior and their Lord allowing that to dictate their prayers. Most of the time you and I pray, dear God, save me. And if you have time, maybe save one of my friends. And all those other jerks, well, ignore their prayers. That's how we act. That's not what Paul did. I don't think you understand the power you have in your prayer life. James 4 tells us that you have not because you ask not. Do you know that you get to go boldly before the throne of God? Some of the things you're missing are simply because you're not actually going to your dad. You're not going to before the Father that has claimed you as his child, and you say, Dad, I need this. God, help me. You're devaluing what it is that God's given you. Do you understand? He prayed for his enemies. He prayed for all of them. God gave him all of them. God gave him 275 people. Some of you have stopped praying for your neighbor, for your own family member. Some of you haven't even prayed for your kids in a while. Some of you haven't prayed for your boss or your employees. James also says in chapter 5 that the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous person, that somebody who gets down and is adamant about praying, it produces amazing, wonderful things. Get into your prayer life. Fill out one of these prayer cards and ask the prayer team, please pray for me. Pray for my addiction. Pray for my struggle. Pray for my attitude. Pray for my heart. Pray for my anxiety. Pray for my friend. Pray for this health issue. Pray for this thing. Let us know. Let people pray. There is so much power in it. And it's your lifeline to feeling filled by God, and you're giving up on it. He does it. He prays for him. It says this. I'll read the rest of the story to you just so you're not left hanging. About midnight on the 14th night of the storm, 2 weeks in, as we were being driven across the Sea of Adria, the sailors sensed land was near. They dropped a weighted line and found that the water was 120 feet deep. That's 20 fathoms. But a little bit later, they measured it again and found that it was only 90 feet or 15 fathoms. And at this rate, they were afraid they would soon be driven against the rocks along the shore. So they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship, and they prayed for daylight. They started to learn how to pray, didn't they? They weren't praying before, they're praying now. He says, then the sailors tried. The sailors, they knew what was up. They're like, this might be a lost cause. The sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboat as though they were going to go put out anchors to the front of the ship. Guys, we'll be right back. We're going to take this lifeboat. We're going to go put some anchors out at the front. Now, you got to remember, these are the guys that heard the breakers. They heard in the middle of the night, they heard the waves crashing, and they go, there is some land nearby. That does not necessarily mean safety. We are safer just floating on top of water. If we hit some rocks, we hit some shoals, we hit a sandbar, we get jacked up, and we're still a long ways away from shore, we're going drowned. So they're like, listen, we can probably make it. We don't have to take all these other people. We don't like these prisoners. We don't like these soldiers. Let's save us. So they jump in. They're getting ready to jump in the lifeboat. And it says, verse number 31, but Paul said to the commanding officer and soldiers, you all die unless these sailors stay on board. And this is where the difference between a sailor and a soldier, the soldiers cut the ropes. The commanding officer, soldiers, he commanded them to basically let the lifeboat drift away. So he's like, oh, they have to stay on? Paul's like, hey, if they leave, we all die. He's like, good luck to that lifeboat. He's like, y'all stuck with us. And so they were. And Paul knew that when God brought their boat closer, they were going to need the sailors to get where they need to go. This is a strong lesson on, even though God tells you to go do something, it doesn't mean you just kick your feet up and be like, I ain't going to do nothing now, I'm good. Sometimes God gives you a mission and he still expects you to do some work. He actually still expects you to go use your brain and react to what's around you. I hear a lot of Christians be like, no, I'm just going to sit back. God's never told you to sit back. Get to it. Even if he promised you, hey, here's the promised land, you might have to actually walk to it. You might have to actually fight some giants to get in there. You might know that God's called you to something, and some of us just sit back, well, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. God likes to use people, but he loves when his people respond with some action. All right, so Paul's like, hey, you guys can't be leaving us. It floats away, and just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. He says, hey, guys, you've been so worried that you haven't even touched food for 2 weeks. Talk about a diet. Good grief. Please eat something now for your own good, for not a hair of your head on your heads will perish. Then he took some bread. He gave thanks to God. Once again, another testimony. Before them all, and then he broke off a piece and he ate it. Then everyone was encouraged to begin to eat. Let me read the rest of the story. All 276, told you, we're on board. That's counting Paul. After eating, the crew lightened the ship further by throwing the rest of the weed out. And when morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to shore by running the ship aground. So they cut off the anchors and they left them in the sea. And then they lowered the rudders, raised the foresail, and headed towards shore. But they hit a shoal and ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the ship stuck fast. And while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves, it began to break apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape. A Roman soldier that was entrusted as a guard, it was a known fact that if you were a prison guard, whatever the fate of those prisoners was on you. So if you let them escape, you took their place. So they're like, we ain't taking no chance of them swimming to shore and get away. Let's just kill them all right here and we'll go to shore. That was their plan. That was a common thing for Roman slave ships. If that was what's going to happen, kill the slaves and then go ashore. But because Paul had won favor with Julius, the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land, and the others held on to planks of debris from the broken ship. And everyone escaped safely to shore. God rescued 275 people in this shipwreck. But once again, it's the story of a shipwreck. We read a lot of stories in this series about the God who rescues, but he always kept that ship together. There's something that changes when you're like, man, the ship I'm on might be going down. Does that mean that God doesn't love me? I'm floating around on a board. Does that mean God doesn't love me? Do you know that in 2 Corinthians 11, Paul wrote that he went through 3 shipwrecks. It was 2 Corinthians 11. 3 shipwrecks. One of the times he was stuck adrift at sea, just floating around till somebody rescued him. This isn't the first shipwreck or the last shipwreck that Paul has to deal with. Boy's a bad guy to travel with. But shipwrecks, guys, doesn't mean the end. Your ship might have to sink, but doesn't mean your life's over. And some of you have been clinging on to a sinking ship, and God's saying, hey, let it go. I don't love you because of the job you have. I don't love you because of all the friends you have. I don't love you because of all the talent, your health, your strength. If it's sinking and you're in my will, trust me. Trust me. I've got something for you. I want you to look back at what Paul says. In verse 34, he says, please eat something for your own good. Not a hair on your heads are going to perish. And then verse 35, it says, he took some bread, gave thanks to God before them all. He made a display of his faith, guys. He looked at a group of people that had not eaten for 2 weeks, that had been facing storms. A group of them just tried to abandon them. They're done. They're like, we are heading. They can hear the waves crashing. It's dark. It's scary. They feel like doom is coming. It's impending. You can feel the tension. And then this one person who knows God stands up and says, hey, my God's bigger than all of this. I see Paul time and again, not just this story, but throughout his life, he brings a calm. And it's only there because he has a faith. He has a faith. The Bible says that when you put your faith in God, you'll have a peace that passes the ability to be understood. And I want you to understand, our faith, it brings a calm when fear brings chaos. The world around us is chaotic. Not just because it's 2020, it's been that way for a while, but our fear ratchets up that chaos. What we need is a person that will stand up in faith and bring a calm. You don't have to act like everybody else. You don't have to believe what everybody else believes. You don't have to put your hope in an election or in a vaccine or in a bunch of people making you feel better or getting a stimulus. You don't have to put your hope in. Now, I'm not saying you can't care about this stuff. I'm just telling you, you have an opportunity to have faith in something bigger. Everybody else looks to the boat. The common sense. This boat's got to save us. No, the boat may not save us. And you can't get all worked up in anger or in fear because it's not going the way you want it to go. Because what you do is you look just like everybody else who has no hope. God's given you a hope if you've put your faith in him. He tells everybody in this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus stands before everybody. He says, you're the light of the world. Don't hide your light under a bushel. He goes on in verse 16 of that same chapter and he says, in the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see so that everyone will praise you for being such a good person. No. When you have faith, when you have something you believe in that's bigger than you, you don't have to lay awake at night going, how am I going to make it? How's this all add up? You can have a calm, even though it's a storm, even though the ship is sinking. You can have a calm that says, guys, there's a God that's a lot bigger than this boat. I know a God that's a lot bigger than whatever it is that you're facing. That health concern, that addiction, this election. He's bigger than this. And it may not work out the way we want it to work out, but he's promised us that if we trust him more than we trust ourselves, we win in the end. And you can bring a calm to your family, to your relationship, to your workplace that nothing else is going to bring, because you're somebody whose faith doesn't rely on the boat. When you shine that light, God uses you in an amazing way. And so I believe that many of you need to respond by saying, God, use me like that light. Let me be a light in a dark place. My family is dark. My neighborhood is dark. My coworkers are in darkness. Use me. And if you're sitting here and you're listening to me and you say, how do I get that light? How do I be that kind of a light? How do I have that? That's why in John chapter 8, verse number 12, Jesus says, hey, I'm the light of the world. Jesus described himself as the light of the world. He said, if you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness because you'll have the light that leads to life. You can have that light inside of you. If you don't have it right now, it's because you don't have Jesus. Invite Jesus in and then trust him. Don't just trust him to take away your sins. He'll do that. He'll forgive you of everything you've ever done wrong if you'll trust him. But trusting him doesn't just mean trust him with your sins and then go back to doing it your way, having it be your time and your money and your talents. But you say, God, I'm trusting you with everything. Whatever you want to do, I'm trusting you. And then, man, watch the despair melt away. You'll be like one of those sailors that was always looking out for yourself and always hoping that everything worked out. And then you can become the Paul who says, hey, if the boat sinks, God will give me another boat. He's got me. And you'll become a different person, and people will see a light that they've never seen before. But it all depends on how you respond to God. So would you just close your eyes for a second? Would you bow your head and give some people some privacy around you? In the quiet of this moment, would you simply ask God, God, what are you trying to show me through this shipwreck? God, what are you trying to do in my life right now? Is there a way I can respond better right now? Jesus, I feel so lost. I feel like I'm one of those people giving into despair. Help me. Give me faith. Give me courage. I don't know how God's poking your heart, but I know that God wants to use you. He wants to start by being a light inside of you, so start there. If you do not know Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, if there's never been a time in your life where you surrendered, where you said, God, take the steering wheel of my life. I'm moving aside. Come inside of me, fill me up. God, take away my sins, give me some hope. It doesn't have to be those exact words, but there needs to be a moment in your life where you trust Jesus more than you trust yourself. If you confess that you're a sinner and that you need him, the Bible says that not only will he take your sins away, but he'll come to live inside of you, and that's how you have that light. And if you're listening to me, and you can hear my voice right now, your job is not to hide that light. Do not get wrapped up in the way the world thinks. Do not get wrapped up in the way everybody else acts. Instead, be a light in the darkness and let your attitude and your actions point people to Jesus. You have a family member right now that's on a sinking ship. You have a friend, you have a coworker, you have somebody who you cross paths with today that's on a sinking ship, and they need you to be that Paul. They need you to encourage them, to show them a better way. Will you do that? As I pray out loud, will you pray right there, right wherever you're at, and say, God, use me, help me. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord God, we ask so humbly that you would forgive us of the times that we choose chaos and fear, we choose anxiety and despair, we choose to be angry, or we choose to be selfish instead of allowing you to dictate our desires and our actions. God, help us be better sons and better daughters, better moms and better dads, better grandparents, better friends, better teachers, better bosses, better employees, better neighbors. God, let us be more like Jesus in every area. Let us have a faith that inspires confidence and brings a calm. God, help us not get so discouraged with a shipwreck, to not be so broken down by things that don't go our way that we miss what it is you're trying to do. God, would you save us? God, rescue the person who right now, the boy, the girl, the man, the woman that's willing to confess you, willing to invite you into their life. Would you save them? Forgive them of their sins, God. Use them. Restore them. Repurpose them. God, would you use every person under the sound of my voice that right now is willing to surrender to you, that right now is willing to allow you to use them to bring a calm, to be a light. God, would you open up opportunities? Would you open up doors? Would you give us avenues where we can love others the way you would love them, where we can care for people who feel forgotten, where we can inspire people who are depressed? God, give us opportunities, small ways, big ways, where we can say yes to you and do something that makes an impact. We pray this, we ask this, we claim this in your perfect and precious holy name. Amen.
Hey guys, Allison here. Just wanted to tell you a couple things that are going on at Harbor before you click off. I hope you enjoyed service today. I thought it was awesome. And we're really glad that you joined us online. First, we're having a first responders drive going on throughout the whole month of October. We want to say a special thank you to our firefighters, police officers, and hospital workers, doctors and nurses. in the Hyannis area and just say thank you and that we love them and that we appreciate them. So if you're coming in person, that you will have seen our table with a bunch of bags. You grab 5 bags, 10 bags, 1 bag, whatever you want, and bring it back with some stuff in it. But we want to make sure that you guys are in on it as well. So you guys are welcome to come by the church during the week, Monday through Thursday, and pick up some bags and then fill them up, bring them back by October 25th. So we want to make sure that you guys are included as well. You're welcome to come and join. It's going to be awesome. We just want to give a shout out to those first responders. Secondly, you guys probably knew we had our movie night scheduled for this past Friday, and unfortunately rain was on the forecast and we decided to cancel it. So we are rescheduling it for October 30th. It's a Friday night. We're gonna do the same thing, movie night out on the parking lot. Bring a lawn chair, we're gonna have popcorn, definitely bring a blanket at that point. And since it's the day before Halloween, come in costume. It's gonna be so much fun. So we hope you'll join us on October 30th for our rescheduled Harbor movie night. All right guys, that's it. Hope you have a great Sunday. We'll see you later.